She lived on the streets for 5 years, barefoot, broken, and invisible. People called her mad, filthy, worthless. But in just 17 seconds on a runway, Mariam Zongo did what no security system, no radar, no protocol could do. She saved President Ibrahim Traoré from a fiery death 30,000 feet above the ground. How? Why? And who was this woman no one listened to until it was almost too late? This is a story of injustice, of a brilliant black woman silenced by grief, swallowed by a system that failed to protect her, and the moment the world had no choice but to hear her scream. What you're about to witness is a dramatized retelling, inspired by real emotions, real systems, and the haunting silence that often surrounds the unheard. While the characters and events are fictional, the truth beneath it, about how we treat the broken, the dismissed, the different, is painfully real. Because sometimes it's not power or politics that saves us, but the one voice we ignored the longest. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the heat was already creeping over the tarmac of Ouagadougou International Airport like a quiet warning. It was just past 6 a.m. And yet, the airport didn't look like an airport. It looked like a stage. Military jets stood in immaculate formation, matte gray bodies gleaming under the floodlights, engines silent, wings sharp like blades waiting to slice through the sky. On the sidelines, rows of ceremonial guards moved in unison, boots polished to a mirror shine, rifles held with precision, eyes locked straight ahead, not a blink, not a breath out of place. They weren't just soldiers, they were symbols. In the control tower, a voice crackled through a secured radio. Phase 1 cleared. Convoy inbound. Repeat, convoy inbound. A black SUV turned the corner onto the private airstrip, followed by 5 more. The flags on the hoods fluttered just enough to catch the morning wind. The moment had arrived. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the second vehicle. You wouldn't see it from outside, but inside that armored car sat a man known for 2 things, his sharp mind and his colder instincts. At 39, he was the youngest head of state Burkina Faso had ever known, a former military strategist turned reformist, hailed by some as the people's lion, feared by others as the man who smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. This morning he looked calm, focused, dressed in crisp white traditional attire, simple, clean, authoritative. In his lap, a leather folder, inside the final draft of his speech, one he was due to deliver in exactly 5 hours at a high-stakes summit in Nairobi. A speech that could reshape regional security or bury his diplomatic leverage for good. Behind him, his chief of protocol read the final security rundown aloud. No unexpected visitors. Weather clear. Aircraft checked. Path secured. Everything was running on schedule. Too perfectly. At exactly 6:13 a.m., the motorcade came to a slow halt at the base of the red carpet. The presidential jet, a sleek military Falcon X, hummed softly, its turbines already warmed up, ready for departure. The smell of jet fuel hung in the air. The sky blushed faintly in the east, painting the world in hues of orange and silver. From hidden loudspeakers along the runway, the national anthem began to play. Low, proud, growing. A camera crew adjusted their lenses for the perfect shot. Guards snapped to attention, and somewhere far off, a bird shrieked once, then fell silent. Inside the SUV, Traoré gave a small nod. Time? 0614, sir, a guard replied. The president reached for the door handle. And then, from the very edge of the horizon, something moved. At first, it was just a shape, small, disheveled, out of rhythm with the choreographed grace of everything else. Then the screaming began, raw, human, and terrifying. No! Stop! Blood in the sky! Fire! Fire! Don't let him fly! Gasps erupted, heads turned. The anthem faltered, and from the far edge of the runway, a woman burst into the open, running barefoot across the tarmac. She was a contradiction to everything around her. In a space of power, she was chaos. In a space of protocol, she was panic. Torn fabric flapped wildly from her limbs. Her hair was tangled like wire. Her face, sunburnt, tear-streaked, was locked in a mixture of desperation and fury. Inside the control room, someone yelled, "Security breach! How the hell did she get past perimeter control?" Outside, guards moved fast, boots pounding the pavement, weapons drawn. The woman screamed louder. Her voice cracked. "He will die! Don't let him board! I saw it! The sky is angry!" President Traoré hadn't exited the vehicle yet. He sat frozen, eyes narrowed, pulse steady, watching the impossible unfold. "Sir, evacuate now? Should we eliminate the threat? Your orders?" But Traoré didn't speak. Not yet. Because even as his security team surged forward to restrain the woman, she threw herself in front of the lead car, arms wide, body trembling, as if she alone could stop an entire machine built on power, timing, and absolute control. In that moment, time stalled. And across the airport, every man and woman in uniform watched in disbelief. Because no one, not generals, not ministers, not foreign envoys, had ever blocked the president's path like this. And yet here she was, a barefoot stranger in rags, screaming into a sky that hadn't yet betrayed its secrets. No one saw her coming. She didn't emerge from a car. She didn't come through a gate. There was no radio warning, no camera alert, no thermal scan that pinged. 1 second, the runway was clear. The next, a figure erupted from the far eastern edge of the airstrip like she had been launched by the earth itself. She ran barefoot. Her feet slapped the concrete with frantic rhythm. Each step looked like it hurt, yet she didn't slow down. A long, torn dress clung to her frame, whipped violently by the wind from the nearby turbines. Her hair was a wild tangle of dust and knots. Her skin bore the marks of sun, time, and something harder to name. Desperation, maybe, or madness. She didn't just run. She screamed, "Stop! Stop! Blood in the sky! He can't fly! It's coming!" The words pierced through the anthem still playing, now awkwardly fading into silence. At first, people didn't react. The brain hesitates when faced with something that doesn't belong. A woman, no badge, no shoes, no place in this rigid, choreographed world, sprinting toward the presidential jet with rage in her voice and fire in her eyes. It couldn't be real. But then she kept screaming, and she kept running, and the spell broke. "Security breach!" someone shouted. "Intercept now!" 2 guards nearest to the plane began sprinting toward her, guns swinging into their hands. Others scrambled from the side barricades. In seconds, the quiet coordination of the military dissolved into chaos. The tarmac became a storm of boots, orders, rising dust, uncertainty. Was she armed? Was this a suicide attack? A distraction? Or was she just a madwoman? A street ghost who slipped through the cracks of reality? Whatever the answer was, she wasn't stopping. And then she dropped. Just 20 feet from the president's convoy, she threw herself to the ground, flinging her arms wide across the pavement like a human barricade. Her chest heaved. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper now. But still, she spoke. "It falls," she gasped. "The plane. It cracks like glass. Blood rains. Don't let him go." Inside the lead vehicle, everything froze. President Ibrahim Traoré sat upright, his eyes fixed forward. He hadn't moved since the moment she'd appeared. His guards were already on the radio, hands on weapons, waiting for the signal. "Sir, we can remove her now," his chief of security said, voice tense. "One command. She's unstable. She's a threat." But Traoré raised a single hand. "Don't hurt her," he said calmly. A pause. Confusion rippled across the convoy. "Sir? She's barefoot," he repeated quietly, "and unarmed. If she was a threat, we'd already be dead." It wasn't an order shouted. It was a judgment spoken, and it carried weight. The guards hesitated, unsure, their hands still twitching on triggers. But the order held, and for a brief, eerie moment, the chaos paused. On the ground, the woman began to cry. Not sob, not wail, but cry like a child too tired to scream anymore. Her body shook, her face buried in her hands as if even she wasn't sure what she had just done. President Traoré opened his door and stepped out into the morning air. His white attire caught the light and billowed slightly in the wind. For a man under threat, his movements were astonishingly slow, deliberate. The tarmac beneath his feet had hosted kings, generals, dignitaries, but now for the first time, it hosted something else. A question with no answer. He walked past the frozen guards, past the stunned officers, and stopped just in front of her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She looked up, her lips trembling. Her eyes were clouded, but something inside them shimmered. "They call me mad," she whispered, "but I remember the wings. I remember fire. You are not safe." Behind him, the chief pilot rushed forward. "Sir, we are already late." "Delay the takeoff," Traoré said without turning. The pilot blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said delay the flight, now." Shock, murmurs. Guards exchanged glances. Schedulers groaned. Ministers whispered. This was a diplomatic disaster in the making. Every minute of delay would echo across embassies, across borders. But none of that mattered now. "Check the plane," the president continued. "Engine, fuel, hydraulics. All of it. Again." The woman, still on her knees, began to rock slowly, her voice a faint chant. "They never listen. The sky cracked. I told them. Blood like rain." A single bird circled overhead, and as the technicians turned back toward the jet, beginning their second inspection, one unplanned, unauthorized, and deeply inconvenient, the woman on the runway went silent. Her tears had dried. Her eyes now stared into the distance. She didn't smile. She didn't move. But something in her posture said she had done what she came here to do. And whether she was mad or something else entirely, President Ibrahim Traoré had listened. For a long moment, no one moved. The woman lay collapsed in front of the presidential convoy, her chest rising and falling in ragged heaves. Her body trembled, her forehead pressed against the tarmac, her hands clawing at the concrete like she was trying to hold on to something only she could see. Her cries were quieter now, but every sound she made seemed to reverberate in the bones of those watching. No one knew what to do. One guard raised his weapon halfway. Another reached for zip-tie restraints. Orders crackled through earpieces, conflicting. Was she a protester, mentally unstable? Was there another threat they weren't seeing? Protocol demanded containment, precision, eliminate unpredictability. And yet, no one moved. They waited. For him. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in the middle of it all. Unmoving, unreadable. His eyes remained fixed on the woman in rags, as if trying to see past her trembling body and into something deeper. Something that didn't make sense. Not yet, but needed to be understood. Then he spoke, only once. "Ground the plane. Check everything." Now the words cut through the chaos like a blade. For a second there was silence, then disbelief. "Sir," the pilot said, stunned, "we already ran pre-flight diagnostics twice. We're clear." "I don't care," Traoré replied without raising his voice. "I want every inch of that jet rechecked. Fuel lines, hydraulics, avionics, sensors, all of it. No assumptions, no shortcuts." "But Mr. President, the summit is not worth dying over." He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to explain himself again. Within seconds, the technical crew was scrambling. Toolboxes rolled. Maintenance covers were pried open. Engineers who had been sipping coffee minutes ago now found themselves rechecking a plane they had already cleared. Some of them exchanged skeptical glances, muttering under their breath. "She's just some street lunatic. This is insane." Still, they obeyed. And while they worked, the woman was carefully lifted from the tarmac by two unarmed guards. Not dragged, not cuffed, but helped. She was limp, exhausted, murmuring fragments of things that made no sense to anyone. "Cracked wings. Fire in the left side. I heard the metal scream." President Traoré didn't follow her. He stayed where he was, eyes on the jet. 15 minutes passed, then 20. And just as people began to assume nothing would come of this, that perhaps the woman had truly lost her mind, a voice shouted from beneath the jet, "Sir, over here!" A technician emerged from the undercarriage, face pale, holding up a small, corroded component in a gloved hand. "We found something," he said. "There's a leak in the left engine's secondary fuel valve system, hidden behind the inner panel. It wouldn't have shown up on the first diagnostics. It was buried deep." Another mechanic slid out from under the aircraft, wide-eyed. If that valve had failed mid-air, he didn't need to finish. Everyone understood. The room wasn't large. Just white walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a single surveillance camera blinking silently from the corner. The only window was frosted glass, letting in a soft, sterile light that made everything feel colder than it already was. She sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them like she was holding herself together, because no one else had. Two guards stood just outside the thick steel door. Inside, she was alone, except for the camera and her own mind. She rocked slowly, back and forth, not violently, not hysterically, just rhythmically, like a pendulum counting down to something only she knew was coming. Her lips moved constantly, forming words no one could decipher. Fragments of thoughts, names, numbers, pieces of long-buried memories that blurred together in a chant only she could hear. There was no ID on her, no phone, no documents. Her fingerprints were scanned, and yet no match came back. It was as if she didn't exist. No name, no country, no record. A ghost in human form. The airport's internal security team was in an uproar. The director, red-faced and sweating through his collar, paced the hallway just outside the observation room, shouting into his earpiece, "This is a catastrophic breach. Heads will roll for this. How did she get through perimeter security? Where were the patrols? This is the president, for God's sake." The personnel inside the control center were scrambling to pull CCTV footage. But the truth was damning. She had appeared just like that, between blind spots, out of frame, as if the ground had simply opened up and pushed her forward. One clip showed her a split second before she sprinted across the runway. Before that, nothing. "She didn't just sneak in," one analyst muttered. "It's like she appeared." The director slammed his fist on the wall. "No one appears from thin air." And yet, there she was. Meanwhile, in the command lounge overlooking the runway, President Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly with a glass of water in his hand, eyes distant. His protocol team whispered among themselves, trying to calculate the diplomatic fallout of his missed summit, making panicked calls to reschedule military escorts, deflect media leaks, control the narrative. But he wasn't listening. He was thinking about her, that woman, the moment she collapsed in front of his convoy. It hadn't felt like madness. It had felt like warning, like grief dressed in torn fabric, like a voice that had screamed itself hoarse for years, finally crashing into someone with enough power and enough silence to hear it. "Sir," the airport director burst into the lounge without knocking, waving a tablet. "She's clean. No matches on any system. Not local, not regional, not international. It's like she doesn't exist. We're doing a full facial recognition scan now, but..." "But?" the president asked, still not looking at him. The director hesitated. "There's something else." Surveillance audio picked up her murmuring inside the room. She's repeating patterns, technical language, aviation terms. Some are old, outdated protocols, ones we haven't used in years. Traoré finally turned to look at him. "She knows aviation?" "It seems that way, sir." Or, "She once did." Silence stretched between them. Then Traoré stood. "I want to see her." "With all due respect, Mr. President, that's not advisable. We don't know who she is, what she wants." "I don't think she wants anything," Traoré said, almost to himself. "She already gave everything she had." He handed the glass to a nearby aide and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. "Prep the room. I'm going in alone." The room was cleared. Guards instructed to wait outside. Cameras kept rolling, but no one dared question the order. The air felt heavier, as if something more than protocol was shifting. Inside, the woman kept rocking, back and forth, until the door opened, and the man she saved stepped inside. The door hissed as it unlocked. a subtle mechanical sound that still managed to slice through the thick silence of the room. The woman didn't react. She remained where she was, curled in the corner, head resting against her knees, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Her rocking had slowed, but not stopped. A quiet rhythm, still counting down something unseen. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped in and gently closed the door behind him. No guards, no aides, no cameras in his face. Just him and her. It was an unusual decision, and everyone outside the room knew it. Presidents didn't walk into unsecured spaces with unknown individuals, let alone those who had broken past military security, thrown themselves onto a runway, and screamed about blood and fire. But Traoré wasn't thinking like a president in that moment. He was thinking like a man who had looked death in the eye and realized it had blinked. Because someone no one else listened to had shouted loud enough. He took a slow step forward, careful not to startle her. The lights above hummed faintly. Her shoulders twitched. "Can you hear me?" he asked gently. No response. He didn't expect one. He moved to the metal chair, bolted to the floor, and pulled it out quietly. Sat down, waited, no rush, no pressure. The room felt like it had its own gravity now, still and heavy, as if any sudden movement might break something fragile in the air. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said after a moment. "I think you already know that." She shifted slightly but didn't look up. Her hair veiled most of her face, still tangled, still matted with dust and sweat. But under that mess was a human being. That much was clear. And somewhere in that human being was something trying to surface, something buried deep. "I want to understand," he continued, voice low, steady, "what you saw, how you knew, who you are." A long silence. Then the whisper, so faint it almost didn't register. "I used to fly." He blinked, sat a little straighter. "What did you say?" She raised her head, just enough for her voice to be clearer. Her eyes were distant, but something behind them flickered for the first time. A glimmer. Not madness, not rage, just memory, struggling to breathe. "I used to fly," she said again, a little louder this time. "Before the fire, before they stopped listening." Traoré leaned forward. He didn't interrupt. Her fingers curled around the fabric of her dress. Her voice grew more focused, like she was navigating through fog with only broken pieces of thought to guide her. "They said I was wrong, that I was overreacting. I ran tests. I saw the stress points. I warned them. They ignored it." "What did you fly?" he asked gently. "Not fly, fix. I worked on engines, turbines. I knew their sounds, their breath. I could feel when something was wrong. I told them it would fail. I begged them not to send it up." Her voice cracked. "They flew anyway. My husband was on board. My daughter, too. I told them. She stopped rocking. Just sat there, still, breathing hard. Her hands were trembling now. "They died," she said. Traoré exhaled quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "They died because no one listened?" he asked. She nodded. Once, slow, heavy. "And since then?" he asked. "What happened to you?" Her head tilted slightly toward the camera in the corner, though she didn't seem to see it. Her eyes weren't on the room anymore. They were somewhere else, with fire and broken wings and names lost in official statements. "I walked," she whispered. "I walked until the voice came back, until I started hearing them again. The metal, the scream. It never left. Just got quieter. Until yesterday. Then it was loud, too loud to ignore." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment her gaze cut through every layer of rank and protocol. "You were going to die." He said nothing. She leaned her head against the wall again. "I don't know how I knew. I just knew. I always do." And there it was, the first thread of coherence, tangled in grief, but unmistakable. A woman who had once been someone who knew what she was doing, someone who had watched everything she loved burn in the sky and never quite landed back on earth. Traoré sat with her in silence, the weight of her words pressing against him like smoke. This wasn't just about one morning, one plane, one delay. This was a woman the world had thrown away, and she had still found a way to save it. The room held its breath. She wasn't crying anymore. Her voice had steadied, just slightly, like a candle flickering in a room that had been dark for far too long. There was something about the way she spoke that made even the silence around her listen. Ibrahim Traoré, still seated across from her, watched every movement, not as a president analyzing a threat, but as a man realizing he might be sitting in front of someone he was never supposed to forget. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Her eyes didn't blink. She stared straight ahead, as if the answer had become too heavy to speak. Then slowly, she turned to him, and something in her expression shifted. Less fear now, more defiance. "They took it from me," she said. "When I screamed, when I wouldn't let it go. They took everything. My name, my work, my dignity." He waited. She inhaled, lips trembling. "They called me mad." The words hung in the air like ash. "But I remember. I remember who I was before the silence. I was—" She stopped as if afraid to finish. Then she said it. "Doctor." Mariam Zongo Traoré froze. That name. It hit him not like a bullet, but like a key unlocking something buried. A news article half forgotten, a briefing note he'd skimmed years ago, a name once praised, then suddenly vanished. He leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Zongo," she nodded just once. "I worked in aviation safety. I wrote the reports no one read. I saw the cracks in the systems before they became body counts. And when I warned them, when I begged them to listen, they told me I was paranoid, that I was grieving, that I was unstable." Her hands tightened in her lap. Her voice grew bitter but not loud. It didn't need to be. "My husband was a military pilot. My daughter was flying with him that day. It was supposed to be routine, but I had warned them. I gave them the data, the valve design, the stress failures. I begged them not to fly." She looked down. Her voice dropped into a whisper. "They both died, along with 17 others." Traoré's mouth had gone dry. He remembered now. Vaguely. It had been a minor scandal, mostly buried. A quiet disciplinary committee, a funeral with military honors. And then, nothing. She had disappeared. "You wrote the technical report on the K-92 engine model," he said slowly. Mariam didn't answer. She didn't need to. "You were right," he added, voice lower. She said nothing. The room went still again. The camera in the corner blinked its red light, recording everything, but capturing nothing of the weight in the silence. The president stood abruptly. He stepped to the door, knocked twice, and when it opened, turned to his aide without hesitation. "Run a full background check on Dr. Mariam Zongo. Everything, academic history, employment, medical records, archived aviation board reports. I want it now." "Yes, sir," the aide stammered. Traoré didn't look back at her as he stepped out of the room, but in his mind a new image had replaced the mad woman on the runway. The image of a brilliant woman screaming into the void of a system that refused to hear her until it was almost too late. The printer in the presidential situation room hummed softly as sheet after sheet fed into the tray. A dozen pages, then 24, photos, credentials, archived documents, disciplinary reports, recommendation letters now yellowed with time. Her name was printed at the top of every page. Zongo, Mariama. Traoré stood by the window, silent. His aide laid the growing file on the table without a word. No commentary, no spin, just facts. Just the paper trail of a woman who had once belonged to the very heart of the aviation authority. He turned the first page. Doctorate in Aeronautical Engineering, Technical University of Munich, summa cum laude. Then the second, Certified Lead Engineer, Burkina Faso Civil Aviation Authority, 11 years of service. Published 4 international papers. Lead investigator on 5 crash inquiries. Fluent in 3 languages. Known for her meticulous inspection reports and stubbornness. The word kept appearing in various forms. Uncompromising, emotionally invested, difficult to overrule. Then came the warning memo. It was written in confident, tight script. Technical diagrams annotated in red. highlighting points of tension inside a fuel valve system used in the K-92 military fleet. She'd written it 6 weeks before the incident that ended her life as she knew it. Her conclusion was blunt, even for a government report. This design flaw is not theoretical. It will fail under high-pressure altitude conditions. When it does, the rupture will be catastrophic. Underneath, someone had stamped it. Reviewed, no action needed. The president read the page twice, then again. Another report followed, a formal appeal she'd filed to the Aviation Oversight Committee. She'd attached test simulations, photographs, testimonial notes from junior engineers who had supported her findings. But the language in the official reply was cold and familiar. Dr. Zongo, while we value your vigilance, your tone and persistence are creating unnecessary concern. Your continued insistence on grounding the K-92 fleet borders on alarmism. This matter is considered closed. He turned to the next page. Crash report. Incident hashtag BFA-M X230. Date 6 weeks later. Aircraft K-92 model. Cause of failure, suspected mid-air engine rupture, left side. Passengers on board, 21. Fatalities, 19. Among the deceased, Captain Issa Zongo and Aicha Zongo, age 8. The photo attached was grainy, a crumpled wing, smoke curling up into the sunset sky. Traoré stared at the names. He didn't realize he'd clenched his fist until the paper crinkled under his fingers. The final pages were short. A formal administrative letter stating that Dr. Mariam Zongo was placed on indefinite leave due to emotional instability following a family tragedy. It recommended she seek mental health support. There was no record of her response, no record of return, no follow-up. After that, nothing, like she had simply vanished. Outside, the sun had risen fully now, casting sharp shadows through the glass. But inside, it felt darker. The weight of truth beginning to settle. This wasn't just a woman who'd lost everything. This was a woman silenced by her own brilliance, punished for being right too soon and too loudly. Traoré flipped back to the report, the technical diagrams, the highlighted weak points. He thought about the same component found faulty in his jet, the one that could have ignited in midair, the exact same failure. 5 years later, he took a breath, steady but tight in his chest. He understood now. She wasn't mad. She was ignored, forgotten not because she was wrong, but because she had the audacity to be right when others were too arrogant to listen. He looked at the final sheet, a photo of her ID badge from years ago, a confident woman in a lab coat, her expression serious, sharp. Beneath it, the name, Dr. Mariam A. Zongo, Senior Aviation Safety Analyst. And the thought struck him hard. How many more like her had been discarded? He didn't speak. He didn't need to. But as he closed the file and pressed his hand to the cover, he knew one thing with certainty. The country owed her an answer, and he owed her the rest of the truth. After the funeral, no one called. No follow-up meeting, no debrief, no apology. The official press release used words like unexpected technical malfunction and heroic last maneuver. Captain Issa Zongo and his daughter Aicha were buried with national honors. But no one mentioned the report his wife had written 6 weeks earlier, the one that could have kept them both on the ground. It was scrubbed, tucked away into the quiet archives where uncomfortable truths go to die. Mariam returned to work a week later, still in black, still silent. She sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of data, simulation results, and notes scribbled on napkins. Her desk was untouched, but her presence no longer fit. Conversations died when she entered. Eyes shifted away when she passed. Her colleagues spoke to her, softly now, not with sympathy, but with caution, as if grief had made her contagious. She tried again. She filed another internal request to have the K-92 fleet grounded until further review. She attached new notes, new diagrams, noting the similarities between her earlier findings and the failure that killed her family. The board replied in one sentence, Dr. Zongo, we urge you to seek time for healing. This matter has been resolved. No one wanted to hear it. No one wanted her to reopen a case that had already been buried with flags and ceremonies. The cracks in the system were now political scars, and she, the woman still grieving, was becoming an embarrassment. They accused her of being emotional. They said her obsession was unhealthy. One supervisor wrote, "She's becoming erratic, unable to separate personal loss from professional conduct. And when she raised her voice in a meeting, just once, trembling but firm, they labeled it hysteria." That word was the beginning of the end. Within weeks, she was placed on leave. No office, no badge, no explanation offered to her peers. She stayed home at first, alone in the house they'd once shared. Her husband's boots still by the door, her daughter's coloring pencils still in a cup on the kitchen table. She didn't clean, she didn't sleep. She just listened. And that's when the voice began. At first it was just a feeling, a shiver at the edge of consciousness. Then a whisper. Not word, not yet. Just metal groaning, bolts shaking, turbines gasping for breath. She thought it would fade, but it grew louder. They never listened. It's going to happen again. Over and over, like a warning etched into her bones. She would wake at night gasping, certain she'd just heard a jet engine fail in the sky, but there was nothing outside, just wind and silence. She stopped responding to emails. Friends stopped checking in. The aviation board quietly severed her contract. No media mention, no public acknowledgement. Within a few months, Mariam Zongo had vanished from every system that once relied on her. She sold the house. Or maybe she walked away from it. No one knew. Some said they saw her on the streets near the train station, scribbling formulas in chalk on the sidewalk. Others said she would whisper into empty air, talking to ghosts or engines or both. But one thing was certain. She didn't stop watching the skies, not even when her name was erased, not even when she became that mad woman near the airport, because in her mind, the voice had never stopped. And deep inside her, a single truth pulsed with the rhythm of footsteps no one paid attention to anymore. It will happen again unless someone listens. The room was dim, quiet, insulated from the usual noise of the State House. Around the long oak table sat members of the president's inner circle, military advisors, aviation chiefs, intelligence analysts, cabinet officials. Each of them had reviewed the same file. Each of them had seen the photos, read the warnings, learned the name they had once let fade into the static of bureaucracy. No one spoke first. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of the table, not pacing, not lecturing, just still. In his hand was the closed folder marked Zongo, Mariam A. He placed it gently on the table, then looked up. "We didn't just ignore her," he said, voice low but firm. "We destroyed her." The words dropped like weight on the table. "We took one of our finest minds," he continued, "and when she told us something we didn't want to hear, we erased her. We told her grief made her unreliable. We silenced her. And then, when she broke, we called her mad, as if madness was a flaw and not the scar we left behind." No one responded. Eyes dropped. Throats cleared. Some shifted in their chairs as if movement might absolve them. "She warned us years ago about the exact failure that nearly killed me this week," Traoré said. "The exact valve, the exact model, the same goddamn weakness. We buried it because it was inconvenient." He looked at the defense minister directly. "I want every aircraft in our military fleet grounded until a full safety audit is completed. No exceptions, no timelines. I don't care if it slows down missions or breaks supply chains. If there's even a chance another aircraft has this defect, it doesn't go up." The minister nodded without hesitation. "Understood." Mr. President Traoré turned to the aviation chief. "Your department will recheck every procurement approval from the last 7 years. I want to know who authorized continued use of the K-92s after Mariam's report. And I want to know what they gained from ignoring her." The man swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Silence returned. And then more softly, Traoré added, "How many others have we done this to? How many more voices have we discarded just because they were inconvenient or loud or different?" No one answered, because they knew, they all knew. There were always more names, always more files. Most didn't throw themselves onto runways or scream into the sky. Most just disappeared quietly, like Miriam had. He let the silence stretch just long enough for it to settle, for the shame to become real. Then he picked up the folder one last time. She saved my life, and not just mine. Every crew member on that plane, every guard, every aide, and she did it after we broke her. He paused, then said quietly, "That's not madness. That's something closer to greatness, the kind we didn't deserve." And with that, he left the room. No one spoke as the door closed behind him, just the weight of truth hanging like smoke in the space he left behind. The room was nothing like the ones she had known. There were no sharp edges, no blinking red lights or metal floors that echoed under boots, no cold concrete walls soaked in fluorescent light. Here the light was soft, filtered through linen curtains that swayed gently with the breath of a hidden air vent. The bed was wide and low to the ground. The sheets smelled of lavender. The mattress didn't creak when she moved. Miriam Zongo didn't speak as they brought her in. She didn't resist. Her limbs moved loosely, like a marionette half asleep. The nurse guiding her offered no questions, no judgment, just quiet movements, efficient hands. There were fresh clothes folded neatly at the end of the bed, slippers placed beside them, unused. A tray of warm food rested on the small side table. Rice, fish stew, and a cup of hibiscus tea still steaming. She didn't touch any of it. Not yet. Instead, she walked slowly, barefoot still, to the window. It stretched from floor to ceiling, a clean sheet of glass dividing her from the world outside. And beyond it, trees. Actual trees. Not rusted fences or floodlights. Not the edge of an airfield or the backs of concrete buildings. Just tall green trees swaying gently under the early afternoon sun. Miriam placed her palm on the glass. The warmth startled her. It had been so long since something didn't feel like a warning. She stood there for minutes, maybe hours, just breathing. No muttering, no rocking, no shaking voice repeating the same desperate words. Her eyes followed the curve of the branches. She counted birds. She listened to the wind push against the trees and then pull back again. And in her head, for the first time in years, there was no engine noise, no grinding metal, no pressure gauges screaming, no wings on fire, just silence. And it was terrifying. She stepped back from the glass, suddenly unsure of her footing. Her hands trembled, but not in panic. It was something else, something like unfamiliarity. Her mind had survived on chaos for so long that peace now felt foreign. Her legs buckled slightly and she sat on the bed. Not collapsed, not broken, just tired. She looked at the food. Steam still rose from the stew. The tea had begun to cool. With slow, deliberate hands, she picked up the spoon. It was warm, solid, not imagined. She took a bite, then another. The nurse came in once later to check her vitals. Miriam didn't speak. She didn't flinch, just nodded slightly. The nurse adjusted the pillow, smiled without expectation, and left quietly. And when the door clicked shut again, Miriam lay down, pulled the covers up to her chest, curled slightly to one side like a child who remembered, just for a moment, what comfort used to feel like. Her eyes stared at the ceiling. No flashing lights, no shadows, just pale ivory paint and a gentle hum from the walls. The silence wasn't empty now. It was full of stillness, of possibility, of the echo of her own breath not drowned out by alarms. No screaming, she whispered. No wings. Just silence. She didn't cry. She didn't speak again. She just closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, Miriam Zongo slept. Not because she was exhausted, but because she finally could. The hallway outside the recovery ward was unusually quiet that morning. Nurses moved slowly, voices hushed, as if some unspoken reverence had settled over the place. Room 213, they all knew, housed the woman whose scream had grounded a president's jet and saved lives no one would ever count fully. When President Ibrahim Traoré arrived, he didn't bring an entourage. No press, no advisors. Just a plain suit, two trusted guards who waited outside, and a sense of gravity that followed him everywhere now. Heavier since he'd read every page of her file. A nurse met him at the door. "She's awake, sir. Quiet, calm, eating well, talking A little. Traoré nodded, then pushed open the door without ceremony. Inside, Mariam Zongo sat near the window, sunlight painting soft lines across her face. Her posture was more upright today, the hair still tangled, but her eyes, once distant, now tracked his movement with measured clarity. "You came," she said, her voice dry but even. "I told you I would," he replied. She studied him for a second, then gestured toward the chair beside her. He accepted the invitation without words. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the rustle of wind through the trees outside broke the silence. It felt less like awkwardness, more like mutual respect for the quiet they both needed. Then Mariam broke it. "I heard it again." His eyes turned to her. "That morning," she continued. "The scream. The same one I heard before the plane that took my family went up. It's not a sound you forget." He nodded slowly. "But this time," she looked down at her hands. "This time I ran fast enough." The room went still again. He wanted to ask how she knew, how she'd gotten to the runway, how she wasn't already dead from the weight of everything she'd carried. But he stayed quiet, waiting. She spoke before he could form the words. "It's not madness," she said, almost as if defending herself. Not to him, but to the world. The voice. People think it's delusion, but it's not. He watched her carefully. "What is it then?" She tilted her head slightly as if searching for the right word. "It's something that guides. I don't understand it fully. Maybe it's memory, maybe instinct, maybe pain that never found a place to go. But it warns me, not with language, with pressure, with pictures, with sound." She closed her eyes. "I saw the crack before it happened. I felt the metal straining. I smelled the fuel. I couldn't sleep for 3 days before you came to that airport. I kept hearing it, the same vibration, the same scream in the bones of the sky." "And you trusted it," Traoré said. "I had no choice," she whispered. "If I didn't run, I would have drowned in it, or someone else would have." She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "They called me mad because I didn't know how to explain it. But when machines talk, you don't need language. You just need someone to listen." Traoré leaned back, absorbing every word. The scientific part of his mind rebelled, looking for logic, for data, for neural explanations. But the man in him, the man who had nearly died, believed her, or at least believed that she believed. And maybe that was more important. "What do you call it?" he asked. She gave a half smile, barely there. "I used to call it grief. Now, I call it warning." They sat in silence once more, but now it was charged with something new. Not tension, not confusion, understanding. And for the first time, he saw her not as the woman on the tarmac or the ghost of a broken system, but as something rarer, a person whose pain had become purpose, however incomprehensible it might seem. Before he stood to leave, she said one more thing. "I don't want to disappear again." He paused at the door. "You won't," he said, and this time, he meant it. The lights in the hospital conference room were dimmed low, but the tension was bright, electric. A handful of senior doctors sat across from President Ibrahim Traoré and his chief medical advisor, papers and charts spread in front of them like exhibits in a quiet clinical trial. Everyone had come prepared. Facts only, no interpretations beyond the data. The lead psychiatrist, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like polished stone, cleared her throat before she spoke. "Mr. President, we've completed a full psychiatric evaluation of Dr. Mariam Zongo over the last 48 hours. Based on all current diagnostic criteria, we can confirm with confidence she is not mentally ill." There was a pause, not for effect, just to let the weight of that sentence land. "What she experienced," the doctor continued, "was a complex trauma response. After the loss of her husband and daughter, her brain adapted in a way that allowed her to function, to survive. The voice she describes, the imagery, the sensory episodes, these are likely manifestations of what we call trauma pattern mapping. Essentially, her subconscious developed a system of warning signals based on years of deeply embedded technical knowledge and unresolved grief." One of the younger doctors chimed in, pointing to a brain scan. She's retained remarkable cognitive function, especially in spatial and auditory memory. When she says she feels when something's wrong in a plane, that may actually be real, just not supernatural. Her brain's wiring is unique. The president listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask the obvious question. Is she safe? Because he already knew the answer. She's lucid, the psychiatrist added. Highly intelligent. There are no signs of schizophrenia, psychosis, or degenerative conditions. She's exhausted. She's emotionally scarred. But she's stable. Traoré sat quietly, fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. He nodded slowly, respectfully. Thank you. There was a collective exhale, the kind that usually signals closure. Logic had spoken. Science had delivered its verdict. But as he rose from his chair and stepped toward the window, watching the afternoon sun settle into gold, a thought echoed in his mind, louder than the clinical certainty behind him. This isn't just science. He had seen too much, heard too much. The timing, the specificity, the clarity in her eyes when she spoke of things no diagnostic chart could explain. There was a rhythm to Miriam's instincts that couldn't be graphed. What if trauma wasn't the end of her mind, but the doorway into something deeper? He turned back to the room. Prepare a space for her, he said simply. A place to work, not to recover, to contribute. Mr. President, she saved us. She's not a patient. She's a resource. Treat her like one. And with that, he walked out, leaving the room full of doctors behind, with their charts, their logic, and a silence they couldn't quite explain. The first report came in less than 48 hours after the order was issued. One of the grounded K-92 aircraft, stationed at a remote base in the north, had shown signs of abnormal pressure in its left engine valve system. The same model, the same configuration that had nearly killed President Traoré. The engineers weren't looking for problems at first. They were going through the checklist out of duty, expecting to confirm what they already believed, that the system was safe, that Miriam's warning was a fluke. But then the second report came in. Another K-92, this one from the coast, exhibited minor but consistent fuel inconsistencies. A valve inspection revealed microfractures that had gone undetected for years. Engineers ran simulations. The results were terrifying. By the time the third aircraft, this one active, recently flown, was flagged with an almost identical fault, there was no longer room for denial. Within days, the findings were escalated to the presidency. The technical data was damning. 3 planes across 3 regions shared the same potentially catastrophic flaw that had killed Miriam's family and nearly repeated itself 5 years later. Traoré read the reports alone. No aides, no advisors, just the documents, a pen in his hand, and the rising burn of anger in his chest. This wasn't a single oversight. It was systemic neglect. He signed the executive order the next morning at 7:16. All K-92 military aircraft were to be grounded indefinitely. No exceptions, no appeals, no discussion. The order hit headlines by mid-morning. By noon, it had gone global. News anchors across the continent led with the story, President Traoré grounds, entire military fleet over safety risk. Whistleblower engineer was right all along. From madwoman to national hero, social media erupted. Hashtags exploded. Memes, tributes, and outrage circled through every major platform. And then the anger came. Not toward the president, but toward the agencies, the systems, the officials who had buried Miriam Zongo alive in a silence she never consented to. People began to demand names. Who signed off on the aircrafts? Who ignored her reports? Who benefited from keeping those planes in the air? Journalists began digging. Independent engineers came forward with their own concerns. Retired inspectors posted online confessions of times they were told to stay quiet for the sake of national image. A quiet earthquake rumbled beneath the surface of the aviation world. For years, people had whispered about cut corners, fast approvals, quiet payoffs. Now they shouted. Inside the government, departments scrambled to protect their reputations. Internal memos were leaked. Former ministers were named. Retired officials denied wrongdoing on camera. But it didn't matter. The tide had turned. President Traoré called an emergency session with his reform council. The agenda was short and merciless. No more silence, no more loyalty to dead systems. We rebuild from the inside out, or we lose everything. Sweeping audits began within the week. Every contract reviewed, every inspector re-interviewed, new safety protocols implemented, and at the heart of it all, a small photo on the corner of the president's desk, a faded ID card bearing the name Dr. Mariam A. Zongo. She didn't ask for the revolution, but her scream had triggered it. Some called it a purge, others called it justice. For Traoré, it was neither. It was survival, not just political, but moral, because now he knew. Every time they ignored someone like Mariam, they weren't just risking machines, they were gambling with lives. The first leak was anonymous. A scanned copy of Mariam Zongo's original report, watermarked confidential, dated 5 years prior. It appeared online in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, posted to a whistleblower forum with only 3 words. She was right. By sunrise, it had gone viral. Within hours, news anchors were quoting directly from the memo, reading aloud her handwritten annotations, the bold red warnings that had been ignored. Screens were filled with phrases like stress fractures, engine valve integrity, and most damning of all, catastrophic failure is imminent. And above all those technical terms was her name, Dr. Mariam A. Zongo. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Shock gave way to disbelief, then to anger. Commentators on radio stations and panel shows asked the same question with increasing urgency. How did this woman fall through the cracks? And who let this happen? On social media, hashtags exploded across platforms. Hashtag she warned them. Hashtag the barefoot prophetess. Hashtag Mariam was right. People shared edited photos of her kneeling on the runway, her arms outstretched like a guardian angel in rags. Others made art, sketches, animations, graffiti murals sprayed on city walls. The name Mariam Zongo became a symbol overnight. Memes and mockery once aimed at her madness turned into homage. One cartoon showed her standing between the sky and the president, holding back a flaming jet with her bare hands. Another painted her like a modern Joan of Arc, barefoot, wild-haired, haloed in fire and truth. Every major news outlet scrambled to get exclusive interviews. Investigative teams traced her academic background, her awards, her early speeches at international engineering forums. Old video footage resurfaced, a much younger Mariam presenting at a conference in Germany, voice clear, gaze unwavering. "There is no safety without honesty," she said in the clip, "and no progress without accountability." That single quote was replayed thousands of times. Journalists camped outside the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of her through tinted windows. Cameras turned every time a nurse emerged. Talk shows invited aviation analysts to explain what trauma pattern instinct was. Conspiracy theorists posted threads speculating that she had some supernatural gift, a divine connection to machines. Others said no, she was simply a genius with a heart too stubborn to stop fighting. But through it all, Mariam Zongo said nothing. No statements, no interviews, no televised thank you speeches. She watched it unfold from the quiet of her hospital room, seated by the window, a cup of untouched tea cooling in her hands. The television stayed off, the newspapers stacked unread. Her only companions were the trees beyond the glass, and the wind that moved through them, a wind she could finally listen to without fear. And in that silence, while the country debated whether she was a prophet or a victim, a hero or a warning, Mariam remained still. Because she had already said what needed to be said. And this time, the world was finally listening. The car that came to collect her was not armored. It wasn't black or imposing. No flags fluttered, no sirens blared, just a modest white vehicle with beige seats and a driver who bowed gently when Mariam opened the door. He didn't speak, just offered her a sealed envelope, thick with the presidential seal stamped in red wax. Inside was a single note. "You once stood for us when we didn't stand for you. Now it's time we do." "IT." She said nothing, only nodded once, then stepped inside. The journey to the State House passed in quiet reverence. Along the roadside, people paused and turned. Some recognized her face immediately. Others whispered her name like a prayer or a myth come alive. Mothers held their children closer, pointing. Older men saluted. A vendor placed fresh bread on the hood of her car, bowed, and walked away without asking for payment. No cameras had been invited, no reporters. This moment was not for spectacle, it was for her. At the entrance, President Ibrahim Traoré stood waiting. Not behind a podium, not flanked by soldiers, just a man, in traditional white robes, standing beneath the high arches of the place where laws were written and futures rewritten. As Miriam stepped out of the car, her steps steady but unhurried, he approached her slowly. She didn't bow. She didn't need to. He reached out, gently placed a hand over his chest, and said the words not scripted by any speechwriter. "We failed you. But you saved us anyway." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes scanned the building, the stone walls, the polished floor, the flag rising in the wind, as if searching for ghosts of her past self. Then softly she said, "I never thought I would walk into this place again." He nodded, not as a warning this time, but as a voice of change. He offered her a file, this time not one that condemned her, but one that restored her. Inside, her reinstatement as a national advisor for aviation safety and emergency early warning, full rank, full honors, a team under her guidance. It wasn't redemption by words, it was responsibility by recognition. Miriam looked down at the title, then at the man before her. "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I want no one else to be silenced again." "You have my word," Traoré replied, and this time everyone would hear it. The gates of the State House opened slowly, almost ceremoniously, as if the hinges themselves knew history was being rewritten. Sunlight bounced off the polished steps, casting soft golden lines across the marble courtyard. Guards stood at attention, uniforms crisp, eyes forward, but just barely. More than one of them stole glances toward the woman stepping out of the white government car. Miriam Zongo had returned, but not as the woman who once screamed on a runway. She stepped onto the stone path with a grace both quiet and commanding. Her hair, now neatly braided, shimmered faintly in the light. The cream-colored dress she wore was simple, but it hugged her figure like it remembered how she used to walk before the world shattered. Her flat shoes tapped softly against the floor, no longer barefoot, but still grounded in memory. In one hand, she clutched a small brown leather purse. Not decorative, not for show. It was worn at the edges, the stitching slightly frayed. It didn't match her new appearance, but it didn't have to. It was hers, and she held it close, like a lifeline. As she crossed the main hall, whispers began to ripple across the corridor. "That's her! The woman from the plane! She doesn't look mad. She looks alive." Miriam heard every word. She didn't flinch. Cameras clicked rapidly from the far end of the lobby, flashes bursting like small lightning strikes. Photographers from every major outlet, some who had once printed her photo with cruel headlines, now fought for the best angle. The president had not invited the press, but they had come anyway. Even silence had its audience. She paused at the grand staircase. For a moment, the sight of it pulled something sharp from memory. That one time long ago, she had walked these halls with her daughter, her hand tiny and warm. That was before the crash, before the report was ignored, before silence became her only companion. Now she took a breath and climbed. Each step felt heavier than the last, but not with fear, with meaning. At the top stood President Ibrahim Traoré, waiting, not on a throne, not behind a podium, but simply by the open door of her new office. His expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. Reverence, perhaps, or apology, or both. As she reached him, he extended his hand. She didn't shake it. She embraced him. It was not long, not awkward, just enough to say, "We were strangers. Now we carry the same fire." Then he stepped aside and motioned her in. Her new workspace wasn't grand, but it was hers. A polished desk, a bright window, a plaque, Dr. Mariam Zongo, National Aviation Safety and Early Warning Advisor. She walked in slowly, placed her purse on the table, and ran her hand along the edge of the wood. The air was different here, not because of the furniture, but because this time, she wasn't asking to be heard. This time, they had come to listen. The Grand Hall had never been this full. Ministers, soldiers, engineers, journalists, survivors, students, all gathered beneath the golden dome of the State Assembly, where history was usually written in policy papers and signed into law behind closed doors. But today, it was not policy that drew them here. It was a woman once dismissed as mad. The presidential seal gleamed behind the podium, flanked by the national flag on one side and a simple white banner on the other. Upon it, a single word embroidered in deep blue thread: truth. The hum of anticipation rose and fell like a tide, only settling when President Ibrahim Traoré appeared at the front of the hall. He did not stride. He walked with purpose, slowly, allowing the weight of the moment to land before he even spoke. He looked out over the crowd, then finally into the cameras broadcasting live to the nation. 5 years ago, he began, a report was written warning of a dangerous flaw in our military aircraft fleet. It was ignored. Weeks later, 2 lives were lost. The woman who wrote that report fell into silence, grief, and poverty. We called her mad, unstable, irrelevant. He paused. But last week, she saved my life. Gasps were audible. Even those who had heard the story already felt it differently when spoken from the very man whose life had hung in the balance. She ran barefoot onto a military runway, shouting words no one wanted to hear, because we had taught her that the truth is punished in this country. The hall was still. Even the reporters had stopped typing. But today, Traoré said, voice rising with resolve, we correct that mistake. He turned slightly, his arm extending behind him, and from the side entrance, Mariam Zongo stepped forward. There was no music, no fanfare, just her presence. Her dress was the same cream color from that morning. Her eyes were steady, scanning the crowd not with fear, but quiet strength. The room, already silent, became reverent. Some people stood. Others wiped away tears. A few simply looked down in shame. She reached the podium and stood beside the president. She was once called mad, Traoré continued, his voice deep with emotion. Today, she is called a hero. From this day forward, by presidential decree, Dr. Mariam Zongo is appointed National Aviation Safety and Early Warning Advisor to the Republic. The applause didn't come instantly. It built from the front rows where students in aviation uniforms clapped first, to the back where hardened journalists stood and joined in, to the upper balcony where cabinet ministers rose to their feet. Then it erupted, not polite applause, thunder, cheers, redemption. Mariam didn't cry, but her lips trembled as she met the crowd's gaze. Her hands rested on the podium, grounded. Traoré leaned toward her slightly, not to instruct, but to acknowledge. You saved us, he said softly off mic. Now help us never forget why you had to. And with that, history changed. Not in ink, not in vote counts, but in hearts. The door closed behind her with a quiet thud, soft and final, like the turning of a page. Mariam stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around her. It wasn't the sterile hush of hospital rooms or the stifling stillness of interrogation chambers. This was different, full of breath, full of light. Her new office wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. A wide desk of polished rosewood stood near the window. A high-backed chair waited behind it, untouched. Sunlight spilled across the floor in golden slants, casting faint patterns on the woven carpet. Along the far wall, a whiteboard already bore scribbled notes from engineers preparing for her arrival. And on the desk, a small plaque. Brass, clean, bold. Dr. Mariam A. Zongo, National Aviation Safety and Early Warning Advisor. She stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment would vanish if she moved too quickly. Her fingers traced the edges of the desk, the grain of the wood warm beneath her palm. In the far right drawer, she found a folder neatly labeled, Priority Briefings, Awaiting Review. In the center of the desk sat a small, carefully folded note, written in looping handwriting she recognized as the president's. From the streets to the skies again. Welcome home. Her lips curved upward. not into a broad smile, but something quieter, something earned. She moved to the window. From here, she could see across the city, the rooftops of homes, the peaks of unfinished buildings, the distant glint of the airfield she once watched from behind fences. The sky above it was cloudless, wide, open. From the streets, she whispered, to the skies again. No trumpets sounded, no crowds roared. But in that room, at that desk, sat a woman who had lost everything and still returned to protect the very nation that had forgotten her. She didn't sit immediately. She stood a little longer, taking in the space, her breath steady. Then finally, deliberately, she pulled the chair back and sat. Not as a guest, not as a warning, but as a voice that could no longer be denied. And outside the window, a plane lifted into the sky, safely. Miriam stood before a packed auditorium at the National Aviation Academy. Once silenced, now she was the keynote speaker. Her voice was calm but powerful. Safety begins with listening, not just to data, but to people. She told her story, not to shame the past, but to prepare the future. Students listened, some with tears, others with notebooks filled to the brim. That week, she launched the Wings of Truth Foundation, supporting families who had lost loved ones in aviation disasters. Counseling, scholarships, reform workshops. She visited regional schools, spoke in multiple languages, met mothers, trained engineers. For the first time, people didn't look away. They listened and believed. In her garden, Miriam sat barefoot in the grass, beneath a wide acacia tree. The same breeze that once carried screams now only stirred soft leaves and birdsong. She closed her eyes. For years, the voice had haunted her. Fire, wings, blood. But now it was silent. Or maybe at peace. She whispered, "Thank you for never leaving me." There was no answer, but there didn't need to be. Nearby, her assistant placed letters on the bench, notes from students, engineers, even families she had helped. She didn't open them all. She didn't need to. She simply smiled at the sky. The sky no longer screamed. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone on a balcony, reviewing a photo of the runway incident. He traced Miriam's figure with his eyes. "She saved more than my life," he said quietly. "She reminded us what humanity means." Behind him, a new generation prepared for takeoff, guided by her legacy. In a quiet town, Miriam walked along a path near a schoolyard. A group of young girls in aviation uniforms passed her. One paused. "Are you the woman from the runway?" Miriam smiled gently. "Yes, and now I teach others how to fly." The girls stared in awe. Above them, the sky was clear, and this time, it was safe. What struck me most about this story wasn't just the dramatic rescue or the hidden brilliance of Miriam Zongo. It was how society had silenced her long before she ever reached the runway. We often judge people by appearances, forgetting that pain can wear many masks. Madness, poverty, silence. And sometimes what looks like instability is actually unhealed truth, trying to find a way out. Miriam's transformation reminds us that healing isn't about fixing someone. It's about giving them back their voice, their dignity, and a place to be heard. President Traoré didn't save her. He simply listened, and in doing so, saved himself, his crew, and maybe his country. This isn't just a story about planes and presidents. It's about how we treat people when they break. It's about systems that forget, and the rare moments when a system chooses to remember and repair. Most of all, it's a reminder that no matter how far someone has fallen, if they carry truth, they still carry power. Question for the viewer. If someone like Miriam stood in front of you today, ragged, trembling, shouting what no one wants to hear, would you dismiss them? Or would you stop to ask, what happened to you? Because listening is more than kindness. Sometimes it's survival. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.